In this episode, we're going to make endpoint visibility feel like a deliberate craft rather than a vague hope that more logs automatically equals more security. Endpoints are where real actions happen, which makes them the richest source of truth in many investigations. But they can also become a noisy mess if you collect data without a plan. Beginners often assume that if you enable logging everywhere, you'll be safer. Yet the opposite can happen when you generate so much noise that meaningful signals disappear. Endpoint visibility is about collecting the right events, turning a small subset into alerts that humans can actually respond to, and deciding which sources are trustworthy when an attacker might be trying to hide. The reason this matters is that encryption and modern application behavior often limit what network monitoring can see, so endpoint evidence becomes the backbone of detection and response. We'll focus on what to log at a high level, what to treat as alert-worthy, and how to think clearly about trust when endpoints can be compromised. A strong way to begin is to separate logs, alerts, and investigations as three related but distinct parts of a visibility program. Logs are records of events, and they serve as the raw material that helps you reconstruct what happened. Alerts are a curated set of signals derived from logs that are deemed urgent or suspicious enough to deserve attention quickly. Investigations are the human-led process of combining logs, alerts, and context to decide what is real and what action is needed. If you treat logs and alerts as the same thing, you either alert on everything and drown, or you log very little and miss important context later. Building visibility means choosing logs that give you coverage, choosing alerts that preserve attention, and ensuring investigations have enough evidence to reach confident conclusions. Even at a beginner level, you can see that these three roles require different design decisions. A good program deliberately balances them so you can detect quickly without losing the ability to understand deeply. When deciding what to log on endpoints, the best approach is to think in terms of activity categories that attackers almost always need. Attackers need a way in, a way to execute code, a way to persist across restarts, a way to escalate privileges, and a way to move or communicate. Endpoint logs can provide evidence in each of those categories if you collect the right kinds of events. Authentication events can show account misuse, repeated failures, or logins at unusual times. Process creation events can show when new programs run and what launched them. File and configuration change events can show modifications to critical areas where persistence is created. Network connection events from the host perspective can show which processes initiated outbound communications and whether those destinations are unusual. The goal is not to capture every keystroke. It is to capture the turning points in system behavior where attackers tend to leave footprints. Those turning points are where logs become defensible evidence rather than trivia. Process visibility is often the heart of endpoint monitoring because process creation is a strong indicator of what code is executing and how it was initiated. When you can see a process start, you can often see its parent process, which helps you understand the chain of causality. For example, an email client launching a script interpreter is a different story than a software updater launching it, and those differences matter for TRIA. Process events can also include command line arguments, which can add context about intent, such as which file was executed or which network address was contacted. Beginners do not need to memorize specific fields, but they should understand why process context is powerful. It links actions to programs and often to users. Without process visibility, many investigations become guesswork because you may see a network connection but not know what created it. With process visibility, you can connect network behavior, file changes, and user activity into a coherent narrative. Authentication and account activity logs are another essential area because identity is a common attack pathway. Attackers frequently use stolen credentials, and they often try to elevate privileges by compromising higher-value accounts. Endpoint and local system authentication events can reveal patterns like repeated login failures, successful logins from unusual sources, and the use of privileged accounts outside normal workflows. Account changes, such as new accounts being created or group memberships changing, are especially important because they can indicate persistence and privilege escalation. Even for beginners, it's useful to see that identity events provide both detection value and investigative value. Detection value comes from spotting suspicious access patterns quickly, while investigative value comes from establishing timelines of who accessed what and when. This is also where endpoint data intersects with centralized identity systems, because correlating local events with broader authentication logs can confirm whether activity was expected or suspicious. A visibility program treats identity evidence as high priority because identity often determines the blast radius of an incident. Changes to system configuration and security controls deserve special attention because attackers often try to weaken defenses. If a device's logging is turned off, if security settings are changed, or if protective services are disabled, that is frequently more suspicious than the initial intrusion activity itself. Configuration changes can include new startup entries, new scheduled tasks, modifications to system services, and changes to firewall or policy settings. These changes are valuable because they often indicate persistence, meaning the attacker is trying to stay. They also indicate intent to evade, meaning the attacker expects defenders might catch them. A well-designed logging strategy captures these high-impact changes and forwards them centrally so they cannot be easily erased. For beginners, the key lesson is that attackers don't just do malicious things, they also try to make the system less able to notice malicious things. So logs about logging and logs about security control state are not administrative details, they are frontline security signals. Endpoint network activity logs can be extremely valuable, but they must be used thoughtfully because endpoints generate a lot of connections as part of normal behavior. The advantage of endpoint network logs is that they can often tie connections to the initiating process and user context, which network-only logs may not provide. This helps in cases where many connections look similar at the network level but have very different causes at the host level. The challenge is deciding what to alert on, because alerting on every new connection would be meaningless. Instead, you look for patterns that deviate from normal, such as connections to unusual destinations, unexpected protocols, unusual volumes of outbound data, or rare connections occurring at odd times. You also care about connections from processes that normally do not initiate network activity. The goal is not to become obsessed with every connection, but to use connection data to strengthen stories built from other evidence. When process and identity events suggest suspicion, network context can confirm what the device tried to do next. Now let's talk about what to alert on, because alert design is where many visibility programs succeed or fail. Alerts should represent events that are either high-confidence indicators of compromise or high-impact indicators of risky change, and they should arrive with enough context to support quick triage. High-confidence indicators might include known malicious patterns, but high-impact indicators might include privileged account changes, security controls being disabled, or new persistence mechanisms being created. A beginner mistake is to alert on low-value noise, such as every benign software update or every routine login, which trains responders to ignore alerts. Another mistake is to alert on complex correlations that look impressive but are too fragile to maintain, causing them to break silently. Thoughtful alerting focuses on a small set of durable, meaningful signals that defenders can act on repeatedly. The aim is to preserve attention for events that matter and to keep the alert pipeline reliable over time. Alerting also benefits from the idea of thresholds and context rather than single isolated events. A single failed login might be harmless, but many failures across many accounts can be a strong signal. A single new process might be normal, but a new process running from an unusual location combined with a suspicious network connection might be more meaningful. The tuning challenge is to balance sensitivity with fatigue, and the best way to do that is often to require a combination of conditions or a pattern over time. This is where beginners can appreciate the difference between logging widely and alerting narrowly. You log enough to see the full picture later, but you alert on patterns that are most likely to represent real risk. This design reduces false positives and increases trust in the alert system. Trust matters because responders move faster when they believe an alert is worth their time. The question of what to trust is the most subtle part of endpoint visibility because compromised endpoints can lie. If an attacker gains sufficient control, they may be able to delete local logs, disable logging, or manipulate time settings to confuse timelines. They may also attempt to mimic legitimate activity so that what is logged appears normal. This is why centralized log forwarding is so important. because logs that leave the endpoint quickly and land in a protected central store are harder for an attacker to erase. It's also why you want overlapping evidence from multiple sources, such as network flow logs, identity logs, and endpoint logs, because an attacker would have to tamper with many systems to erase the full story. Trust is not a binary choice. It's a question of confidence based on where the evidence came from and how protected it was. For beginners, the easiest rule of thumb is that local logs are useful but fragile, while centrally collected logs are more trustworthy, especially when access controls and integrity protections are strong. A good program assumes endpoints can be compromised and designs evidence collection accordingly. Endpoint visibility also depends on time consistency, because investigations rely heavily on sequencing. If endpoints have inconsistent clocks, your logs can show events out of order, which can cause false interpretations about what caused what. Attackers may also attempt to manipulate time to create confusion. So a visibility program includes ensuring that endpoints synchronize time reliably and that central collectors record receipt times alongside event times when possible. It also includes preserving enough detail to reconstruct timelines, such as process start times, user logins, and network connection initiation. The point is not perfection, it is coherence. You want to be able to tell the story of an incident in a way that matches reality closely enough to take action. When time is inconsistent, responders waste time arguing with the data rather than responding to the threat. Trustworthy timelines are one of the quiet foundations of effective security operations. As we wrap up, remember that endpoint visibility is a design system with 3 goals: collect evidence that matters, alert in a way humans can sustain, and build trust in the data even when endpoints are under attack. Logging should focus on core attacker needs, such as authentication activity, process execution, configuration and security control changes, persistence mechanisms, and host-level network behavior tied to process context. Alerting should be selective, emphasizing high-confidence indicators and high-impact changes, with enough context to support fast triage and with patterns that reduce noise. Trust should be built through centralized collection, protection of monitoring infrastructure, time consistency, and overlapping evidence from network and identity sources. When you think this way, endpoint visibility stops being a pile of logs and becomes a coherent capability that supports detection, investigation, and response. That capability is what turns endpoint security from a checkbox into an operational advantage.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.